So I want to welcome everybody to our Raising Your Dairy Best Heifer webinar series. This is our season 2 of our webinar series here. My name is Jennifer Bentley, and I work as a dairy field specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, based in Northeast Iowa. So my office is in Winneshiek County, but this is the third session that we're offering here with our Dairy Best Heifer webinars. We do have some more upcoming ones. We are hosting these weekly, so they're going to be coming up in the next couple of Wednesdays. So if you want to advance the slide there, Isaac, I can show the next group of webinars coming up. So next week, I'm actually going to be your presenter next week, weaning the other transition, and then we'll finish up October's webinar is talking about colostrum delivery strategies with Dr. Ryan Breyer and Dr. Don Sackett from University of Wisconsin. So a lot of good topics that we're talking about this fall with Raising Your Dairy Best Heifer, and excited to jump into this topic here today, utilizing genetics to improve dairy calf health and performance. So happy to have Dr. Isaac Haagen. He's an assistant professor of dairy production at the University of Minnesota. He grew up on a small registered Holstein farm in central Pennsylvania. And before joining the faculty at the University of Minnesota, Haagen completed his BS and PhD at Penn State University and was a postdoctoral scholar with the USDA National Animal Germplasm Program in Fort Collins, Colorado. And so right now at the University of Minnesota, Haagen holds a joint extension and research appointment, and his applied research program focuses on utilizing genetics to improve the health and efficiency of dairy cattle, which most of your focus right now is around genetics of dairy young stock. And so that's going to be on the docket here today. So with that, Isaac, welcome to our webinar series.
Thanks, Jen. Today I'll be mainly talking about some of the things that are going on within the industry related to utilizing genetics for calf health and performance. And then I'll also discuss some of the things that are ongoing in research and that may be coming down the pipeline in terms of tools that will be available to producers for genetic selection. So just a brief roadmap of where we're going to be going today. I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we define breeding goals for dairy farms and what that looks like in terms of the traits that are included and what traits are currently available for young stock. So what traits are related to calves and heifers that are currently part of our breeding goals or that may become part of our breeding goals in the near future. And then I want to take a little bit of time at the end to talk about some future developments. So once again, that research that we're doing and others are doing related to young stock performance. So just to get started, I really want to talk a little bit about how we define selection goals in the United States, because I think that's really important when we start talking about how producers will actually select for improved health and performance in their own programs. So very quick and to the point, the main goal of any selection program should be profitability. Dairy producers operate with really tight margins, and there's a lot of importance there for placed on what is the profitability of cows on operations. So in terms of selection, we generally just define this as income minus expenses on the cow level. So typical income that we would account for would be milk, of course, as that's the most important and largest source of income for dairy producers. Another source of income would be the salvage value. So this is the value that the cow generates when she leaves the herd. So obviously a cow leaving the herd has, a sale value. And then calves. So the more offspring that an animal is able to produce, the more income that she's able to generate. So historically, those calves would have been replacement animals into the dairy herd. Now we also have to consider that those offspring will be, beef on dairy and be terminal. But still, being able to generate more beef on dairy calves increases the income potential of a cow. And then typical expenses that we would see would be feed. So once again, that's the largest expense that dairy farms have. And then we try to incorporate rearing costs in there. A lot of these are either related to, age at first calving, and how the cost of raising that calf from birth until she gives that first calf. We also have health in our expenses. So any type of disease or health event costs a producer both time and money. And then the final expense that we generally incorporate into selection goals are breeding expenses. So how quickly and efficiently can we get that cow pregnant? So that's a lot of different categories, right? And so we have to then ask the question is how do we select then for the most profitable cow? And the sh- the answer to that is we try to combine all of the traits of economic importance into a single value. And we combine them into this single value or single index by weighting each trait by its economic importance. So, for instance, things such as component yields, fat and protein tend to get weighted fairly heavily in our indexes because they have a large economic value. So, an example of this would be lifetime net merit. So, lifetime net merit was originally developed by scientists at the USDA, and it's based off of price forecasts into the near future. It is a measure of predicted lifetime profit of a cow, and it's designed for the average dairy producer. And that's an important qualifier as we move on into our next slide, actually talking about that there are actually a lot of different indexes available. So I mentioned net merit was originally developed by the USDA. It's now maintained by the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding. The Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding is the organization that's responsible for conducting and distributing national evaluations in the United States. So net merit is kind of the average overall kind of overarching index that's used. But there are other indexes that the council publishes, such as cheese merit, grazing merit, as well as fluid merit. I'll primarily focus on net merit and cheese merit, since those are the indexes that the council publishes that are probably the most widely used. Uh, so there are slightly different weights that are placed on traits within these indexes. So as I said, net merit is for what we would consider the average dairy producer. Cheese merit is geared towards producers that are uh, have more of a component-based pricing. In reality, that's probably actually most producers now. And so there's some differences in the weights, such as cheese merit placing in additional weight on protein production, for instance. And then a lot of breeds have specific indexes as well. So, for instance, TPI or Total Performance Index is published by Holstein Association USA. And JPI or Jersey Performance Index is published by the Jersey Association. Breed specific indexes tend to place a little bit more weight on conformation than what we would see in other indexes that are published across the industry. So, for example, TPI places about 25% of the emphasis of their index on conformation or type traits. And then there are proprietary company indexes as well. Probably the most widely known or the one that's the most popular would be DWP dollars or Dairy Wellness Profit. And that was developed by Zoetis as they kind of came out with their Clarified Plus offerings for cow wellness and calf wellness traits. And as you would expect, it places a little bit more emphasis on those direct health evaluations than the other indexes that I've mentioned. And then breeding companies and also have a lot of the breeding companies have developed their own proprietary indexes. I'm just mentioning one here, which is Select Sire's Herd Health Profit Dollars. In reality, all of these indexes are quite similar. They do place weight slightly differently, but they're highly correlated among each other. So, for instance, all of the indexes published by the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding have correlation above zero point 0.9, generally speaking, which means that if you're selecting on one index, you're likely making progress in the other index as well. So here I'm just talking about the traits that we select for within the index, and they're just overall weights. So along the x-axis of this chart, you can kind of see all of the traits or trait categories that are included in net merit at this and cheese merit at this time. So these traits include milk, production, fat yield, protein yield, productive life. This is a measure of how long an animal is in the milking herd, essentially, before she is called or leaves the dairy. Somatic cell score. So this is a measure of udder health. We generally want this number to be lower. Body weight composite, we use this as a measure of body size. And so this is often used in calculations, for instance, of feed saved, as animals with higher body weights have higher maintenance costs. Udder composite is next, then feet and leg composite. Daughter pregnancy rate, so this is a measure of fertility. Calving ability dollars, so this is a sub-index within net merit and cheese merit that measures how easy it is for an animal essentially to give birth. Heifer conception rate, cow conception rate, livability, so this is whether an animal lives or dies. So obviously we want that number to be higher. Health dollars, so this incorporates all of the health traits that CDCB evaluates into a single sub-index. RFI, or residual feed intake. So once again, here we would like a lower RFI value. Early first calving, so this measures how essentially is a measure of the age at first calving of animals, and then heifer livability. Across both net merit and cheese merit, we can see that the primary emphasis is on our component yields, fat and protein. But as I stated on the last slide, there are some subtle differences. So cheese merit, which is our yellow bar or gold bar, does place greater emphasis on protein yield than net merit does. And then we can see that other areas that receive quite a bit, maybe a little bit more emphasis than others, include longevity traits, so productive life and livability, as well as our feed efficiency traits such as body weight composite and RFI, which are combined to make a feed saved value, contributing, recognizing that those are the largest expenses on farms. There's been past work that indicates essentially and helps shows why indexes are important and why they should be used on farm for making selection goals or selection decisions. So this slide is looking at some work that was done by Zoetis and published related to their dairy wellness profit dollars. And what they did is they went into some herds and ranked animals based off of their DWP value. They then split those into quartiles. And by that I mean they split them into 4 equal groups. So they had the lowest 25% within the herds for DWP dollars. So those would be the worst 25%, all the way up to the best animals in those herds, or the best 25% for DWP dollars. So what this is saying is essentially those best 25%, we were predicting that they would have higher lifetime profit. And what they did in this study is they went in and they validated that prediction to say, yes, that the the animals that had higher DWP values did in fact make more lifetime profit than their peers within herd that had lower DWP dollars. And that's a really important thing to think about when we think about what we should be selecting for. This helps show that if we use an index, that the animals that have higher values for that index are more profitable. There is a little bit of a caveat, though, with that, in that that study was within herds. So it's saying that cows within a herd that have a higher index value make more money than their herd mates that have lower values. What it doesn't tell us is that if a producer uses higher net merit sires, that they will then make more money than perhaps a peer producer that is using lower net merit sires. There wasn't a study a little over a decade ago out of Ireland that tried to answer that question as of do herds that have higher net merit values make more money than herds with lower merit values, genetic merit values. And so they looked at net margin per cow, which is just revenue minus expenses divided by the herd size. And what they found was there was about a €2 increase in profit per cow per year as their economic breeding index increased by 1 unit. So just saying that if a herd had higher merit animals than their neighbor herd, they made more profit per cow. We were interested in kind of validating this in the US. And we did that by looking at Minnesota dairy farms. And this was a joint project between the University of Minnesota and Penn State. And we were able to combine financial data from these herds with sire selection on those herds. So we had yearly financial data from these herds from 2012 to 2018. In addition, we also had cow records for these herds associated with sires. So we had just under 71,000 cow years in this data set. And what we were able to do then is with that sire data, essentially determine what the average sire net merit was of animals born within those years. And then we were able to kind of say, all right, did the herds that selected sires with a higher net merit value make more money than their peers? The profitability measures that we looked at were rate of return on assets, net farm income, and net farm income per cow. I'm going to focus primarily on net farm income per cow in our discussion on the next slide, because this is just a little bit easier, I think, value to interpret. And there are some issues with net farm income in this analysis in that it is highly tied to herd size, whereas net farm income per cow is not tied to herd size since it is net farm income per cow. So when we looked at the relationship between sire net merit and herd profit, I want to focus on the net farm income per cow column in the far right. So what this table is showing us is that for every $100 increase in average sire net merit, a herd made approximately $87 more per cow per year. Now, that's in today's world of very tight margins, things like that, that's an appreciable number. And I also want to state that that's actually a quite achievable number in increasing average sire net merit by $100. When I looked maybe 6 months ago or so at the range between the top bull for net merit and the 100th ranked bull for net merit, there was there's a $300 difference between those bulls. So there is that range that we can actually select for within the Holstein population. Now, there are a couple caveats that I would like to point out for this analysis. One is that the percent of all of the variation in farm profitability measured as net farm income per cow in our model, so that would be both management and genetic factors, was only 45%. And the percent of variation explained by sire net merit across all of our traits was generally somewhere between 2 and 4%. Um, that's not an insignificant amount of variation, but it's just to say that there are a lot of other factors that are contributing to herd profitability that were not accounted for here, and that there certainly are herds that have high net merit but might have a little bit lower profitability, or herds with lower net merit that might have higher profitability. But on average, herds that select sires with higher net merit do in fact make more money than their peers. But as I stated, an index should combine all economically relevant traits together. And so that always begs the question of, are we actually incorporating all of the relevant economically relevant traits? I tend to think that we're not incorporating quite enough traits related to young stock, recognizing that dairy replacements are the second largest expense on most dairy farms. Um, by all accounts, so if I look at records from FinBin, which is the financial accounting system that was developed by researchers at the University of Minnesota, most estimates are that the current cost of raising dairy replacements is greater than well over $2,000 from birth to calving. And in addition, we know that there are changes in the herd demographics across the US. This just shows the changes in cow numbers, heifer numbers, and then the replacement rate across about the last 15 years. And then if we look at the orange line, which is cows, we can see that that number has steadily is fairly steady, if not increasing a little bit. At the beginning of this year, there were just under 9.4 million cows in the US. And that's compared to just a little over 9 million in 2010. When we look at heifer numbers, which is the blue line, we can see that that has declined from a high of about 4.8 million in 2016 to under 4 million in 2025. So what that means is that what I'm getting at here is that we have less animals, less replacement animals as shown in the replacement rate for our milking herd. That just means that it becomes more important that we do a good job, or the best job that we can, with every replacement animal that we have, as we don't have as much room for error or as much room to call out poor performers from the lactating herd. However, there are limited calf traits available to select for nationally. There's two that we can pretty definitively say kind of fit within the calf or calf or heifer realm. Those are heifer conception rate and heifer livability. As I stated, heifer conception rate is that's our genetic prediction for fertility in young stock. And then heifer livability, that just measures if a heifer lives or dies on the farm. Perhaps we could also include early first calving, as that's kind of giving an indication on whether or not we've done whether that animal has the genetics to get bred at an early time frame to then make it into the milking herd in a timely manner. But there are limited traits related to this time frame for selection in the US currently. So when we start thinking about what other traits might we want to select for in dairy heifers, it's important to think about what we want in a dairy heifer. I categorize those kind of into three categories. We want our heifers to be healthy, so free from disease. We want them to grow quickly so that they can make it to reproductive maturity. And then once they reach there, we want them to be fertile. We want them to get quickly pregnant to make it into the milking herd. And I think that these goals are pretty universal across any production system that we talk about. Kind of going back to our previous slide a little bit, we already have some traits related to fertility. And we're just starting to get kind of maybe into that healthy side of the calf sphere. And we know that calves face a lot of, and heifers face a lot of health challenges. So, most estimates of scours during the pre-weaning period are generally just under 20% of calves experiencing scours, and that's from NOMS data. And then for respiratory disease, that's about 12.5%. So these are diseases that are affecting quite a few of our heifers on farm. And then mortality rates about 5% nationally, according to NOMS data. And I think one of the interesting things is that over the last several decades, while we've done a pretty good job of reducing mortality through management, we maybe haven't done quite as good of a job across the industry on reducing respiratory disease and scours through management alone. And so I think there are opportunities through genetic selection to make some improvements in these areas. And there has been industry movement towards improving calf wellness or calf health through genetic selection. So Zoetis introduced calf wellness traits for Holsteins and Jerseys through their calf wellness dollars index, which is also incorporated into their dairy wellness profit. They have genetic evaluations for respiratory disease, scours, and mortality. And the heritabilities for these traits, which are in the table to the right, range from about 4 to 6%. This is pretty typical for any type of health or fitness trait. These are very similar heritabilities to what we would see, for instance, for DPR or cow livability. In addition, these traits had a low to moderate correlation with net merit, which just indicates that there is an opportunity to select for these traits to make progress. If the correlation with a net merit or another index, for instance, was closer to 1, we might say that there's not really a lot of opportunity beyond selection, or there's not a lot of opportunity to make further advancement in these traits genetically, since they're already highly correlated with net merit. But since we have low to moderate correlations with current indexes, there's opportunity to make progress in these traits genetically. So Zoetis went ahead and incorporated these into their dairy wellness profit dollars. It's about 6% of their index. And so I think that was a really positive first step. And I really give a lot of credit to Zoetis for developing these traits and providing the industry with a tool that I think was really needed. However, there is the caveat with that is that these evaluations are only available to Zoetis customers that are genotyping animals with their Clarified Plus genomic tests. And so they're not available nationally to all producers or necessarily available on all bulls. CDCB has been working on developing their calf health evaluations that will be released nationally. So I was just at the CDCB industry meeting here end of September at World Dairy Expo, and they were talking about that they'll probably be releasing these traits sometime in the near future. They don't have exact dates available yet, but we can expect that they'll be released here in the future. Their heritability estimates are pretty similar, once again, to other health traits. They're low, about 2.2 to 2.5%. But as we've shown with a lot of other health and fitness traits that we evaluate genetically, even traits with low heritability, we can make steady and consistent progress on. The table on the right just shows the correlations between scours and respiratory disease and other traits that are currently evaluated in net merit. Once again, these correlations are very small for the most part. and modest at best, which just really indicates that there's opportunity to make progress related to calf health by doing direct selection for scours and respiratory disease. And the one advantage of these evaluations coming from the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding is that they will be available to producers nationally and available on every sire. Um, I've been involved in some work looking at genetics of calf health in organic dairy cattle as well. And our results are pretty similar to the results that have been put out by Zoetis and Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding. But one of the important things that I think that this helps shows is that there are differences across production systems once again. And differences across how we define traits. So for instance, in our evaluation, we looked at rather than mortality, stayability until 1 year of age. And so this was just whether an animal remained in the herd at 1 year of age or whether she had left or died for involuntary reasons. We actually chose this for our organic dairy producers because our organic dairy producers, if they had to treat with an antibiotic, had to remove that animal from the herd. But I think that this also is a perhaps a good trait to consider when we start thinking about non-completion rate of heifers. And not every heifer is actually dying on the farm, but that doesn't mean they're making it into the milking herd. And in fact, on study population that we had, stayability was about 75%, meaning that about 25% of the heifers were being removed from the herd by 1 year of age and did not have the opportunity to make it into the milking herd. Our heritability for this was about 8.5%. So a little bit higher than maybe some other than heifer livability or mortality evaluated by Zoetis, but once again, still fairly much in line with what we would expect for a health or fitness trait. We also looked at the correlation with some other longevity traits that are evaluated nationally, such as heifer livability, cow livability, and productive life, and found low to moderate correlations, just indicating that stayability is perhaps a little bit different of a trait, but also perhaps indicating that alternative producers that are within alternative production systems, such as organic, might benefit from having some evaluations that are geared a little bit more specifically towards them. In addition, we looked at some calf health traits such as respiratory disease and scours. I just put the incidence from our data set here. So about 11.5% of the calves were being treated for respiratory disease, and about 44.5% of the calves were getting some sort of remark in their dairy comp or herd management records for a scours or diarrhea event. Heritability estimates were pretty similar once again, 8 to 10%, very common for our health traits. And then when we look at the genetic correlations with some of our longevity traits, such as cow livability, heifer livability, and productive life, we find low to moderate correlations again, just suggesting that there are opportunities available with the incorporation of direct evaluations for calf health to make improvements, genetic improvements in these traits compared to where we're at currently. One kind of call to action I have, though, is from this, and I think you'll probably hear this from most geneticists that are in the sphere of looking at health traits, is the importance of data collection and data recording. So all of these evaluations that I've talked about, whether they're from the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding or Zoetis, the first step in these evaluations is producers recording these events. And ideally, they're recording these events in something like PC Dart or Dairy Comp. And then, so Zoetis doesn't necessarily have they're working with collaborator herds, so don't necessarily have the requirement that those herds participate in DHI testing. But for records that are going to the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, those herds are also participating in DHI testing and then opting to have those records sent on to the National Collaborator Database. And so I just have a brief call to action to actually record these events, ideally in your herd management software, whether that be PC Dart, Dairycom, DHI Plus, and then also to make sure that you have opted for those records to flow into the National Cooperator Database. You do have an option on whether they do or do not flow into that database. But I hope that our producers are recognizing the importance of these evaluations and allowing those records to flow in. And then in my last little bit, I just want to talk a little bit about traits that are currently more in the research stage across research institutions, including at the University of Minnesota, which is where I work. And this just recognizes the importance. I think a lot of the traits that that were mentioned on the other screen, feed efficiency, growth efficiency, body composition, just really helped are influenced by the fact that we know that increasing average daily gain during the pre-weaning period leads to improved milk production once that cow enters the lactating herd. I'm just showing some figures from some work done here at the University of Minnesota by Hugh Chester Jones, showing that about a quarter-pound increase in average daily gain during the pre-weaning period resulted in about 128 more pounds of milk and about 60 more pounds of both fat and protein. And of course, that's been shown across numerous studies, not just here at the University of Minnesota. So one of the things that we're working at within my research group is actually trying to understand the genetics of growth and understand if there's some opportunities maybe to select for calves that have higher average daily gains. And so we have a data set available. We had a data set available to us that incorporates calves from 3 commercial farms in Minnesota that have been born across the last 2 decades. So we looked at arrival weight. So that's that AWT. So that was the weight of the animal when they entered our calf raising facility. Weight at 56 days. So that was their final pre-weaning weight. Their average daily gain from arrival to 56 days. And then we also had serum total protein values available for all these animals. So we thought it would be interesting to look at what was the relationship between serum total protein and growth during this period from a genetic perspective. And I'm just showing some of the parameters here. So you can see that the average arrival weight for animals into this facility was about 86 pounds. The average weight at 56 days was about 168 pounds, average daily gain, and serum total protein values. So when we looked at the heritability of these traits, we actually found that very high heritabilities. So these heritabilities, so for instance, our arrival weight and weaning weight or weight at 56 days, the heritability for those traits were both above 0.6. Those are, when we compare those to averages from other cattle studies, primarily in beef, those are towards the high end of the range that we've seen from our beef colleagues. And then our heritability for average daily gain was 0.39. So this is really just showing that there probably are some opportunities available to make some selection on growth efficiency within our pre-weaning calves. And then when we look at the correlations, the genetic correlations between these traits, not surprising, there's fairly strong correlation between our growth traits, so average arrival weight, weaning weight, and average daily gain all have fairly high correlations. We did have slightly lower correlations between the genetic correlations between serum total protein and our arrival weight and weaning weight, and these were actually slightly negative. This could just be concentration effect. So, for instance, calves that had higher average arrival weight, just by nature of having higher body weights, might and being delivered perhaps the same amount of colostrum, might have just had lower serum total protein values. There's also been some work showing that lower serum total protein values are correlated with uh, more difficult calving, and so there could be some calving issues in there as well. But there was a nice moderate correlation between serum total protein and average daily gain as well from a genetic perspective, suggesting that there is a positive relationship between those two traits. And then there is work across the industry looking at feed efficiency in calves and heifers. So out of Australia, they've looked at residual feed intake. So that is just how much more or less feed an animal ate comparatively to what they were predicted to eat. So we would like lower values there. And they found a moderate heritability there of 0.40 in heifers that were about 6 months of age, and they found a positive association with first lactation efficiency. So suggesting that selection at one age does translate to improved efficiency at an older age. And then some geneticists out of Canada have started looking at residual metabolizable intake. So that's just related to the amount of energy intake that an animal had, and looked at the heritabilities there, and also found some fairly low to moderate heritabilities for pre-weaning residual metabolizable intake, ranging from 0.19 to 0.32. So just starting to show that we have some opportunities to select for feed efficiency during this period as well, which I think is pretty important, as these animals are mainly just feed sinks at this point or at this age. Here at the University of Minnesota, we're also starting to get into some residual dry matter intake or residual feed intake in these animals. And I'm just showing some distributions here of what we're seeing from a phenotypic side, just showing that we have a lot of variation across our animals and opportunity for selection. And then I want to highlight that we also have, there are also breed differences that are clearly in play. So some work that I was involved with during my time at Penn State looked at some sire breed differences in terms of body weight and average daily gain, with sire breeds being either Jersey, Holstein, or Montbéliard. And Montbéliard is a French breed that does have some selection towards carcass traits, and tends to has had longer selection towards health and fertility as well. But what we see is that there are clear differences in body weight at 1 week of age, as well as body weight at 6 weeks of age, or closer to that weaning period between our breeds, with Jerseys not surprisingly having a lower body weight than the Holsteins or Montbéliards, but with Montbéliards having higher body weights than our Holsteins, just showing that there are breed differences that potentially couldn't be exploited as well. When we look at average daily gain based off a sire breed, we see that we also saw some pretty big differences in these, with Montbéliard sired animals having higher average daily gains. And then the final thing that we're working at here at the University of Minnesota that we're starting to get look at is more in terms of body composition. And one of the reasons that I got interested in this was some work done out of Canada showing that animals that have higher body mass indexes actually have higher survival across the first 80 days of life comparatively to animals that have lower body mass indexes. So we're actually actively doing some ultrasound of dairy calves, looking at rump, back fat thickness, and muscle thickness. to determine how body composition might be related to not only feed efficiency, but also the health of these calves and whether or not there are some opportunities for selection. So one of the keys for opportunities to do selection on any trait is that there's variability. And so that's kind of been our first step, is looking at the variability of back fat thickness and muscle thickness within these calves across the pre-weaning period. And I'm just showing some histograms here just to show that calves are increasing in back fat thickness across this time in the rump region, but also that there is variation at each age. That's replicated when we look at muscle thickness, which is what I'm showing here now, that there is quite a bit of spread in the amount of muscle thickness depth of these calves across the pre-weaning period, just indicating that there may be some opportunities for selection for these traits. And I think that this is actually going to be these more carcass related traits or body composition related traits are not only important for feed efficiency, but are also going to become more important for selection within the dairy industry as we rely more heavily on beef on dairy as a source of income for our dairy farms. So just some conclusions and future directions before I conclude my presentation and we open it up for questions, is just that the use of a selection index is optimal for making genetic improvement. And I hope that most farms will use a selection index, regardless of what that selection index is, that they're using a selection index for their breeding decisions. Most indexes already include measures of calf and heifer mortality as well as heifer fertility. And there is a high correlation across indexes in the United States. And when we start thinking about some of those other categories that are important for young stocks, such as health and growth, in particular related to health, our popular indexes within the US either already include calf health traits such as DWP dollars or will very soon, such as net merit. And finally, research is being conducted today and will be conducted moving forward in the near future. And I think we're going to see more research being conducted on feed efficiency, growth, and some body composition or carcass traits within the dairy industry. In particular, looking at different breeds as well as beef on dairy crosses, just as that becomes a more important income stream for our dairy producers. And with that, I will conclude my formal presentation, and hopefully we'll get some questions here.
Well, thanks, Isaac, for that presentation. And just as a reminder, I did put the evaluation into the chat here. So if as people are logging off today, if you wouldn't mind clicking on that so we can evaluate our webinar series. It helps us with our further programming here today. So if you have any questions, you can certainly put them into the chat box here, or we're probably a small enough group too, we could unmute your mics if you want to ask a question out loud. You kind of answered my question, Isaac. I had written down during your presentation, do you see these traits being used in our dairy beef crosses? And I think your answer is stay tuned, right? So there's probably going to be some further research because I think that's quite a valuable animal as we look at our industry.
Isaac, a
Yeah, and I
question, I
think,
guess. Okay, go ahead.
yes, Larry. No, go ahead, Larry.
Just a question, I forgot that you're going to answer that one, but just a question I always have, we've got so many crossbred dairies out there, and all these traits are kind of breed specific. Is there anything out there that people that are doing dairy crosses, like a 3 or 4-way cross, can take a look at, or just assume what's happening in one breed is going to be kind of part of what's going to be happening as they cross that breed with another breed?
Yeah, so I think that's an important consideration when we're looking at crossbreeding, is that it's really important to select breeds that are making progress within breed. So those crossbreds our crossbred populations generally will follow the same trends as their purebred counterparts. So for instance, making sure that we're selecting breeds that are making continual progress. So that's part of the reason that Holstein is almost always incorporated into a crossbreeding scheme. Not only do they tend to have higher values for most economic traits, but we know they're making progress across time. And so I think that is just whatever breeds we're choosing, we're making sure that they are having continual progress, and then our crossbreeds should follow those trends.
Thanks, Isaac. As we take any more questions, I do note that there's a question in the chat about, is this webinar recorded? And yes, it is recorded, and it will be edited within the week, and I'll send it out to our registered participants, so you'll have access to go back and review the webinar as well. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, Larry, unless you got any questions that came in on your end.
Yeah, I don't see any other ones, but nice job, Isaac.
Okay. So I see one from John about resilience in the future. And could you clarify that maybe a little bit more? So when I'm thinking of resilience, I'm thinking of some of the work being done right now out of UW-Madison, looking at resilience in terms of consistency of, for instance, let's say it's not consistency, but resilience in terms of milk production, in terms of perturbations, minimizing the variation of milk yield across the lactation. When I think of, I'm not sure if that's what you mean by resilience, or you mean resilience in terms, okay. So in terms of for young stock, I would think of resilience then in terms of their ability to withstand perturbations, whether that be probably something unrelated to health if we have a health evaluation, but it could be a feed change or something like that, and being able to maintain, for instance, growth during that period of time. I don't know of anybody that is currently working on that. And so I'm not sure of the exact how that will be used in the future. I do think that that's something that we probably have the data for. The one challenge with that, that may be a little bit different than milk, is that those evaluations for milk generally are using daily milk yields. And a lot of places don't have daily weights for calves. That we would be and daily intakes for calves, for instance, for either an average daily gain or let's say as some sort of feed efficiency measure. But if we had daily weights for calves, that might be something that would be a little bit easier to look into.
And Isaac, as that question came in, I was thinking about resilience too, as far as environmental factors too, right? Could that be part of that picture, looking at cold stress, heat stress, those types of things too?
Yeah, cold stress, heat stress. There are some groups that are also looking at, for instance, air quality in particular in that age. When we start thinking about wildfire smoke and things like that, at least I know here in Minnesota, we're just in that direct line anytime there's a wildfire in Canada. And I think might be some opportunities to some resiliency for that. Oh, daily events, yes. So that is another good point, is that as wearable tech for calves is actually kind of new, but is just starting to kind of pick up a little bit of speed right now. So I think there are opportunities to get some more daily events that way for animals. And then how long should data be recorded in order to make it work on future predictions? The It doesn't necessarily need to be recorded for a very long time. It just takes time for us to validate those predictions. And then um, even if we have genetic availability, there's genetic variation, we can do selection on the trait. It has to be recorded across a multitude of farms, and we have to have enough records available to actually potentially do selection on the national level. And that's one of the big caveats is is the data that's being collected on a large number of farms routinely and consistently, and is it flowing into the national database that we can evaluate it nationally? There are certainly traits that we potentially could evaluate, but aren't flowing into the national database. So a lot of our precision technology, for instance, we might have enough data to do it, but it's not flowing it's not flowing through the right systems to actually be able to utilize it for genetic evaluations.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming into the chat box here, Isaac. I want to thank you again for your great presentation, a lot of good information, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this research coming down the pike as we take a look at calf health and improving their performance with genetics. So appreciate you being on here today, and we hope people can join us next Wednesday, the same time, as we talk about post-weaning and weaning strategies coming up into their transition period. So with that, we will conclude for today. Thank you.